Yeah, so the crazy-ass man with the messed up mustache who locks his wife up in the attic is Edward Rochester. His wife's name is Bertha Mason. She's a Jamaican Creole, so of course she's the person we're supposed to think is the crazy one. And the 18-year-old teenage girl who Rochester seduces is Jane Eyre. The movie begins with little Jane being persecuted by her mean-ass cousins and her demon aunt, Miss Reed. She raises Jane after her parents died, and Mrs. Reed gets tired of Jane after a while, so she has an evil pastor named Brocklehurst take Jane to his jacked-up orphanage called Lowood School. There's this one scene when Brocklehurst yells at Jane for no reason at all, and the actor looks like he's about to have an aneurysm.
Now stand on that stool. Now, girl!
Listen, this actor is so committed to this role for real. So Jane eventually makes a little friend, but she tragically dies due to the unsanitary conditions at Lowood. By the time she's 18 years old, Jane becomes a teacher at Lowood, and she eventually accepts a job as a governess to a little French girl named Adele in a scary-looking mansion called Thornfield. This is where she'll eventually meet the owner of the mansion, Edward Rochester. He's currently away on business, aka traveling around the world and sleeping with every woman he can find in order to erase his misery from living at home with his wife, Bertha. Now, Rochester epitomizes every single toxic trait that you can think of. He fetishizes Jane, who's 20 years younger than him, because she's a virgin and untainted by the world, I guess. And he also yells at her when he doesn't get his way.
But look as though I'm all right.
No idea what real love is!
Why are you running? Why are you running?
He gaslights her, and instead of simply telling Jane that he's in love with her, he decides to psychologically manipulate Jane into confessing her love for him. This psychological manipulation begins when he brings a random woman named Blanche Ingram to Thornfield. She's the complete opposite of Jane. She's blonde, rich, and stuck up. Rochester allows Blanche and her guests to insult Jane without coming to her defense. And eventually, poor Jane leaves the room, and Rochester tries to make Jane stay in the room with these people. He then commands her to stay with his guests every day of their stay at Thornfield, knowing full well that this will torture Jane because they're mean to her. This is messed up. The next day, a mysterious man comes to visit Rochester, and later that night, the dude screams and wakes up the whole mansion. Rochester wakes Jane from her sleep and tells her to help him treat the man's wounds, which were caused by a mysterious person living at Thornfield. Afterwards, Rochester finds a doctor for the man and continues to boss Jane around and commands her to take a walk with him. He asks Jane if she'd be willing to do anything for him, and she said that she'd do anything for him that was right. He also confessed that he knows Blanche only wants him for his money. Later, Jane has to go away to settle some things with her dying aunt, and she's gone for longer than anticipated. When she returns, the only thing Rochester cares about is how he felt abandoned by Jane, and he barely says anything about Jane's dead aunt. The psychological manipulation continues when Rochester threatens to send Jane far away to work as a governess in Ireland to see how she'd react and to see if she loves him. Of course, she's devastated, and she finally confesses her love for Rochester while breaking down crying. And then they awkwardly kiss as if their lips are at war with each other. And he proposes to Jane. They shop for her wedding dress, and then the mysterious person living in the mansion rips up her beautiful veil. Obviously, Jane becomes frightened and worried that a random-ass person whom she's never met before is living at Thornfield, attacking people and ripping up her veil. But Rochester gaslights her and basically tells Jane not to worry about anything, that it's all in her head, even though this exact same person even tried to burn Rochester alive earlier in the movie. Later on, they're getting married at the chapel on the property. Look at how the housekeeper is dressed in all black, like she's going to a funeral. She knows something is wrong. And then that same man who was attacked earlier interrupts the ceremony and says that Rochester is married to another woman named Bertha Mason, and she's locked up in the attic. Rochester yanks Jane around and takes everyone up to the attic to see his wife Bertha, who's imprisoned in the attic like a wild animal because she's mentally ill. Look at how she tried to get some vitamin D from Rochester. Bertha was trying to get her freak on with Rochester, okay? But she gets mad when he rejects her and she attacks his ass. I don't even blame her. Rochester goes on to say that he was tricked into marrying Bertha before he knew the extent of her condition. He was tricked by the same man who was attacked earlier, and it turns out that he's Bertha's brother. Jane is devastated and decides to leave. Rochester gets angry, yells at Jane,
I was prepared to commit bigamy because I knew that being married was important to you.
and yells at Jane some more.
You are a married man!
But I'm still me!
She escapes to live with some other cousins, one of whom actually proposes to her, but she's still in love with Rochester. She inexplicably hears Rochester call out her name in the distance, and she returns to Thornfield only to see it burnt up. Someone tells her that Rochester currently resides at another mansion, so she goes to see Rochester, and he's blind due to trying to save Bertha from another fire that she started, and she tragically died. Man, justice for Bertha, for real. Rochester is jealous and thinks Jane may have met and fallen in love with another man. She assures him that in spite of his physical flaws, she still loves him, and they all live happily ever after. Rochester is a hot-ass mess. Let me know what you think of the movie down below in the comments. Let me know which other movies you'd like for me to recap, and while you're here, check out my other videos. Deuces!